Hey guys, today my guest is David Gu. He's the CEO of a Y-combinator backed startup called Recall.ai, and they're making a universal API for meeting bots. So we talk about his company, we talk about the rise of meeting bots, we talk about possible cultural changes that could be caused by the rise of, perfect recall, basically. Yeah, it was a good conversation, so I hope you enjoy it. Here's David Gu. All right, let's jump into it. So, David, you're the CEO of Recall.ai. Give me the pitch. What is your company about?
Absolutely. So Recall provides APIs and infrastructure to get data from video conferences, Slack huddles, all of these various platforms where people are having conversations. Conversations are the world's largest data set. There's more data spoken over phone calls and video conferences every single year than there are words on every single web page on the entire internet. So there's this really large volume of data. And we provide infrastructure to help developers get that data and process it with AI.
Do you use any AI yourself, or are you because AI, a bunch of AI bots and things like that, are using the data that you provide, but how much AI is there involved in just pulling the data into a normalized format?
So that's a great question. What we do is we provide the infrastructure and the integrations that actually connect into the platforms and pull the data. And we integrate with third party providers for AI processes like transcription. For example, we have a bunch of transcription partners and we integrate with them. They handle the actual processing of the audio into text. And it's the same way with the other AI related products and functions that our customers need. We integrate with them. But the core of what we do is we provide this infrastructure and integration platform to get the data, send it to whatever downstream location you want, whether it be your servers, whether it be a AI API or service provider, and get that back all in low latency.
That's very cool. So, how did that happen? Was that something where you sat in a room and just thought about what a good startup idea would be, or was it more natural?
The last company my co-founder and I started was a tool that needed data from conversations. Is a tool for user researchers that would capture their research calls in real time and give them the ability to annotate it to pull out important sections. And we launched that product way back in 2020.
Hmm.
And we thought that we were going to spend the majority of the time building really cool product features, making this a really smooth, interactive user experience. What ended up happening was we were spending 80% of all our time on the infrastructure. And that wasn't what we wanted to do,
Hmm.
but it's what we had to do because it turns out capturing and processing a large amount of video in real time is just a very, very difficult technical problem. And we ran this for over 2 years. We had a few thousand small customers. We processed a few million hours of video. But for this entire time, we had just spent the majority of our engineering efforts just making this infrastructure better, making it more reliable, and eventually we got pretty good at it. And then 2022 rolls around and large language models are getting really, really good.
Hmm.
We see startups getting created where to accomplish the natural language processing that these startups are doing, even 2 years ago, it would have taken an entire team of machine learning experts over a year. And now these startups are building products in months that are getting even higher accuracy, that are getting even better results. And these are very, very small teams, two founders or a team of five. So we start talking to these companies and we ask them, how are you getting this data? This is a big problem for us. If you have a solution, we would love to know.
Hmm.
Turns out they didn't have a solution. it was just really hard for everyone. And they were running into issues with reliability and scalability. And after running this infrastructure for 2 years, we'd gotten pretty good at it. So we decided, hey, how about we just take this and we sell it as a product? And that's how Recall came to be.
That's very cool. So, without giving away any trade secrets, like, could you give me a taste of just what the infrastructure is like? Like, what technologies are you playing with? Are you using like Kafka or anything like that?
That's a great question. Fundamentally, we are writing a lot of high performance software. We use a lot of Rust,
Mm-hmm.
and we are getting video data in real time. We are transforming it, whether it's compositing several streams into one stream, or changing the format, or splitting out audio streams and sending them off to other destinations. We're doing all of this in real time, and we're doing this at very, very large scale. So today we power over 700 companies, and we capture millions of hours of conversations every month.
Mm,
That just means you run a lot of servers, you write a lot of high performance code, and you need to be very conscious of the speed and performance and efficiency of execution. And that makes it actually a really, really interesting problem domain for engineering. If you're writing a web service, efficiency is important. It's not the number one thing, but if you're running real time video processing across tens of thousands of machines, then efficiency gets really, really important.
for sure. So, like, let's dig into Rust because I love talking about Rust because it's just like eternally so. It just seems to spark flame wars on the internet all the time, and that's part of why I love talking about it so much. Um, like, what's been the biggest benefits from using Rust, and what have been the biggest challenges?
The biggest benefit of using Rust overall is just a great language.
Hmm.
If you want to do something high performance, you have a few options, some of them good, some of them not as good. When we were evaluating what language to use for the really performance critical parts of our app, you could go with C or C++. There is Rust, and then there's Zig, and
Mm-hmm.
then there's also Go. Go has its own trade offs, great language, um, own set of trade offs. And out of all those languages, Rust was decently mature.
Hmm.
It had a pretty solid and wide community. There were a decent number of companies using it in production, and it was much more ergonomic to work with than something like C++ or C. Obviously, those are great languages. They've gotten much better over time. A lot of the tooling around C++ and C is just a little bit more difficult to use. And the memory safety stuff for Rust is also very nice as well. Of course, you can write memory safe C and memory safe C++. It's a little bit more work, but Rust just makes that a lot more ergonomic. And
Hmm.
especially in the libraries you're using, it's a general first class consideration.
And then what about the challenges?
Great question. I would say one thing you need to be a little bit conscious of is compile times. You can
Yep.
get most of that problem solved with splitting things up into different compilation units and being a little bit careful about some of the features in Rust, which can generate large amounts of code that then needs to be um, compacted. It's been a little bit of a consideration for us, but it hasn't been a huge problem and it hasn't been insurmountable. It's just one of those things where you need to pay more attention to optimizing compile times earlier than you would if you were using a language like Go.
Yeah, for sure. Go is very fast. It's funny. Go is so fast at compiling that now that like Lazygit, my pride and joy, is like at least 50,000 lines. Like a while back, it was about that size, but even now, it takes like maybe 3 seconds to compile, and that's like bothering me because I've been spoiled so much. But it used to just be instantaneous. Like there was like you couldn't perceive the difference between if it was already compiled or not. And so with Rust, like one thing I'm curious about is like, have you had any challenges with like like testing the code, like unit testing. And the reason I asked that is my previous company, we were doing some Rust, and I was kind of tripping up on this issue where if I wanted to do like dependency injection, I was often having to choose between boxing everything or having like these, type parameters that kind of ended up like polluting the code depending on how far down, how nested things were. Does that resonate at all with you? Because I haven't. That was probably a couple years back now. But yeah, have you had any challenges on the testing side?
That does resonate. And it's interesting because we work with two languages that are on very different sides of the spectrum. We have a decent amount of API level stuff that's getting done in Python.
Mm,
Python is very nice from a mocking and dependency injection and unit testing perspective, just because it is a dynamic language and you
mm,
can monkey patch things, you can swap things out at runtime, you can do all sorts of contortions that make it really easy to isolate the code under test. Rust is a little bit more difficult to test in such a flexible way, just because, again, statically typed language, you just need to put a little bit more thought into things up front. The pattern you ran into where you've got template parameters or you've got um, interfaces you're implementing and you're doing some sort of dynamic dispatch, again, it's a thing you run into. One nice thing about Rust in a way that makes this less problematic is a lot of the cases where you would really want tests in Python get
mm.
removed by the flexibility and strength of the type system. In Python, you might assert the shape of data, you might assert that a field isn't null. There's a whole bunch of things that can potentially go wrong. In Rust, you have stronger guarantees in function boundaries that the data is what you think it's going to be. And that reduces the need for the uh, kind of testing that you see in dynamically typed languages.
So you talked about having lots of servers running, right? And I noticed in 2022 you wrote a blog post about like how you use Docker files, like Docker file centric programming. Are you still heavily using Docker now?
So we are using Docker. Docker is really nice.
Mm,
I like it. It's got its problems, but in my opinion, it's one of the really great software inventions of the last 10 or 15 years. Um, we do run a lot of servers. We do run a very large number of Docker containers. And out of all the pieces of our stack, Docker has been relatively good. There's some rough edges sometimes around Linux internals, and
mm.
if your Docker containers need permissions to do certain things, and it exposes you a little bit to parts of Linux that typically you might not encounter. But it works. It does its job, and it's been very reliable for us. So, yeah, we like Docker. Docker's great.
Nice. All right. Do you just out of curiosity, do you use dev containers?
So we do use dev containers, and dev containers have been just very helpful. We have some people who have Mac OS machines. We have some people who have Ubuntu or Debian machines,
Hmm.
and you can get some sort of library weirdness. If you have different versions of libraries, if you have libraries that across different CPU architectures have different problems, using a Docker file, using a Docker build environment, and um, the dev container can help with a decent number of these issues.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I went and spent a while going like setting up a dev container, but I've been too lazy to use it. Like I was doing it where I was like, I wanted to get my desktop computer to be hosting the thing and like a remote connection, but I've
Yeah.
just been too lazy to go and actually do the final step. So it's just like all the code has been written, I just haven't actually used it. But that's good to hear. So one last question on the tech side of things: what is like something that an outsider wouldn't expect to be a hairy problem um, in your problem space, right? So, someone, say a new developer joins your company, they're like, all right, lots of high performance code, lots of infrastructural stuff to make it all happen quickly. What's something that like you guys deal with that you just had no idea would be like a challenging problem?
The really fascinating thing that happens when you're running lots and lots and lots of servers is you run into issues that on an absolute scale don't happen very often. We have this blog post about debugging a 1 in 36 million seg fault in our audio encoder. 1 in 36 million is pretty good odds. If
Yeah.
something had a 1 in 36 million chance of happening, I'd be pretty happy to bet that it's not going to happen. But when you're running at very large scale and you're ingesting thousands and thousands of thousands of concurrent audio streams, these things start to happen with decent
Mm.
frequency. And I would say it's both a good thing and a bad thing. It's bad because you just have to deal with the really hairy issues, but it's good because that's the kind of work where, as an engineer, you develop a very deep understanding of the system and you get the opportunity to actually dive in and figure out how do things work at a very granular level. When we were debugging this issue with this seg fault, we got a core dump, we looked through the core dump, and then we realized actually we need to go read the code in this audio encoder. And we dove into the code of this audio encoder, and then the issue was actually in a library or a function in that encoder package. We looked uh, into that code, and we realized actually this is maybe 30 years old. There is a mathematical error in the way that they're calculating the energy level of this point in the audio wave, and that's causing a seg fault.
Right.
And if we were a different kind of company where we ran things at lower scale, something 1 in 36 million would happen once every 2 years, and we'd never
You
have a
wouldn't even
chance to
care.
investigate it deeply. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but it's just very, very interesting the amount of understanding of the computer you get to develop when you have such a high bar for reliability and performance.
Yeah, that's really cool. All right, so switching to more about the company itself, do you have like a long-term vision on like where the company is going, or is it more that there's just like enough on your plate dealing with the current problem space? Like, do you have like a moonshot of like, in 10 years' time or whatever, like, having some cultural impact on society, like that kind of thing?
Fundamentally, the reason we're building Recall is because conversations are the world's largest and most valuable data set, and we're here to make it easier for developers to work with this data. It's very interesting if you look what happened in the last 5 years. In 2019, video conferencing was niche. In 2019, we wouldn't be talking to each other over a video conference.
Hmm.
We would be meeting people in our local respective metro centers. We'd be going to events. Um, and when the pandemic started, it really forced everybody to get familiar with talking to people through a video conference. And what lots of people don't realize is that actually vastly increased the amount of information available to computers. There's more words spoken over phone calls and video conferences every single year since 2020 than there are words on the entire internet on every single web page. That's a huge amount of information. And before 2020, all of this was just in person interactions that you just couldn't access with a computer. So there's just enormously more information available to computers. And simultaneously, what's happened is large language models have gotten really, really good. And they've gotten so good that now any developer can get extremely high quality and useful results processing this unstructured data. So we've got this huge new data set, which is all the conversations in the world. And we've got this really effective set of tools for working with the data, which is large language models. And there's an enormous amount of potential to bring these things together. There's so many amazing products that developers can build. The thing that holds a lot of teams back is just the infrastructure is just really annoying. You don't want to
Hmm.
be working on infrastructure. You don't want to have to manage it. You don't want to be the one on call when it's on fire in the middle of the night.
It's the least enjoyable part of programming. Is some people love it. Power to the DevOps people out there who all they want to do is infrastructure. I will never. It'll never be my my passion because partly because it's a lot of it's semi arbitrary. It's like you've got all these cloud providers need to play by their rules. Whereas programming is a bit more pure. I feel because it's like just a bit more fundamental. Um, but so I can understand why your customers are like, let's go find someone else to worry about those problems for us.
And fundamentally, when you're starting a company, and this is probably very relatable to you because you've started your own startup, there's a problem which you're really passionate about and you want to solve, and you want to um, change the world in this way by bringing this product into existence. And dealing with all the adjacent stuff, setting up your hosting, scaling your servers, billing your customers, none of that's related to what you're actually passionate about, what you want to be doing.
Mm,
For us at Recall, the thing we're passionate about is building the best and most scalable and most efficient infrastructure possible for all these developers, because the thing that they care about is their product.
mm,
The infrastructure is not what they should be worrying about. It's what we really enjoy working about. It's what we really enjoy improving. But that's because it's our focus. Um, and it's just a lot of fun because we get to work with some really amazing companies building products that uh, 3 or 4 years ago would have just been impossible. So it's very
mm.
much living in the future.
All right. So speaking of the future, let's talk about the future. So I want to put forward some hypotheticals and get your take on them. Um, One of the things I've been noticing is we use a thing called TLDV, which for all I know is one of your customers by now. But basically, they're doing like they'll it's basically just a meeting bot. Joins the meeting, gives you a transcript afterwards, and we're finding that now like if we were on a stand up and we had some discussion, we can go back and just you can just search for like, what did this person say about this thing? And it's actually been able to like resolve disputes among the founders where it's like, didn't you say this thing? And it's like, did I say that thing? And you can just go back and find out. And it's like, it's amazing how much time is wasted, at least in my life, maybe because I'm just like someone who is down to debate this stuff, but just time wasted trying to argue about what was said in a conversation. And all of a sudden, for certain conversations that happen to happen, in stand up on a call, the problem just goes away entirely. Um, and I'm thinking about like, I can imagine a society where it becomes a cultural norm where everyone's just carrying around, let's say, their phones, just always recording audio, right? And they are just, they get this perfect long term memory of all these conversations. And they can then go and rely on that rather than having to use imperfect, memory. Like my memory is so bad. Like I'll greet someone and then forget their name immediately, like immediately. And I'm wondering, like, if a cultural shift like that happened, do you think that would be a good thing for the world, or do you think it would be a bad thing, or something in between? Like, because I think it's a possibility that as a society we might agree that the benefits outweigh the negatives. But obviously, there's like privacy concerns. So, like, how do you think about that kind of hypothetical?
This cultural shift is already happening. I was in a coffee shop the other day with a prospect of ours, and we sat down, we started talking, we started having coffee, and he took out his phone and said, "Do you mind if I record this conversation?" And I said, "Of
Mm,
course." And that was so interesting to me because it felt exactly the same as when I'm in a video conference and somebody asks me, "Are you okay with me recording this conversation?" I say, "Of course."
mm,
5 years ago, if someone sat down with me in a coffee shop and asked to record me, that would feel really weird.
yeah, I think even honestly today, I'm yet to have someone in a coffee shop ask to record something, but I it's certainly true that recording of like video calls at the very least is like that's totally normal nowadays. Like everyone's doing that. Yeah.
And people are getting more and more comfortable with AI processing this sort of data, with summaries getting generated. The utility and ease of recording these video conferences has made people a lot more comfortable with having any sort of conversation recorded. And that's really interesting because this cultural shift you're talking about, it's already happening.
Hmm. That's interesting. So I'm wondering, like, what's going to happen to privacy? Because it's similar to even like the rise of social media, where people are. It turns out people are just cool with their data being used by advertisers and stuff like that. It's like people just don't really seem to care enough to stop using Facebook or Instagram. Um, and yeah, I wonder if maybe one of the big cultural changes we're going to be seeing, just even in the next 10 years, is just privacy as a value just becoming less and less important to people. Um, I still wonder, I still think that humans do care about privacy to some extent. And, I wonder how much consent will play a role. Like, will we get to a situation where, like, everyone just knows that everyone has their phone already recording when you're in the coffee shop, and you're both going to go back and listen to things at your discretion, or whether we'll just get cultural norms about consent and like efficiently, getting consent for recording things. Um, what do you think about that? What do you think about the consent side of things?
This is a great question. And this is something that we've worked through with a lot of our customers because recording consent, not only is it a cultural requirement, it's also a legal requirement depending on where you live and what state you're in and what the local laws and regulations are and what state everybody else on the call is. It's a pretty complicated topic, and we've helped hundreds of companies figure out what best practices are. We've worked pretty closely with a number of product leaders, and I think the overarching theme here is it's really important for people to know that they're being recorded. It's really important that you're not sneakily recording people. That's not good. You shouldn't do
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
Um, but the sense that I get about privacy in these recordings is that a lot of the really new and exciting and interesting use cases are primarily from the customers we serve in B2B. They're people at work talking to their colleagues, they're
Hmm.
salespeople talking to their customers, um, people in the financial services industry. For a lot of these meetings, the balance between am I worried about this being recorded and is it useful to have this recorded tilts very heavily into it's useful and I'm not that worried.
Hmm.
If I'm on a daily stand up, I'm not going to say anything that I wouldn't want other people to hear,
Uh huh.
right? If I'm talking to a customer, I'm not going to say something that I wouldn't be comfortable standing behind.
Hmm.
And if I'm a financial advisor talking to my client, I'm not going to say anything that I wouldn't want to be on the record. And if I'm a doctor talking to a patient, I'm not going to say anything I'm going to feel really, really bad about. I think the balance potentially shifts when it's a personal situation. If it's you talking to a family member or you talking to a friend, maybe the value of having this recorded is lower and the risk or the concern is higher. But
Hmm.
what we're seeing really broadly across dozens of industries on the B2B side is it's just so valuable to have these conversations captured and summarized and analyzed. And broadly, people in B2B contexts don't really say that many things that they would feel bad
If it was
about
like
being
on the
captured.
front page of a newspaper. Yeah.
Yeah.
I probably had a couple times in a stand up where I'm especially comfortable with my team, where I just say something crazy and just see what the reaction is. Maybe I'll do that less nowadays, especially with the new technology. But I had never thought of that. It's true. Like, you go to work, you are a professional, and so there are already professional expectations on you. So yeah, why would you care if you're being recorded? It's funny. It reminds me actually of the so one of the things I've been looking at in my company is like we're servicing all this data about license usage among subscriptions, and we just realized that if you aggregate at an employee level, you can actually learn a lot about the employee themselves and what they're doing day to day. And we were thinking about how you know a lot of performance management software is really incendiary because they get you to put a tracker on your computer. And so if you're on Reddit looking at cats, that's being tracked. And that's like, if it's on your personal computer, it's got nothing to do with work. And people get really upset about that. But if you're only getting data that's just, what they're doing in the SaaS applications that they're supposed to do as part of their job, then it's like, it's not really a violation of privacy because you're just it's only thinking about the stuff you're doing at work. So it's just an interesting parallel um, where there's very different psychological responses to being tracked in terms of like in a professional context where there's already those expectations versus in your own personal time. So that's very interesting. Do you think there will ever be a time where, you know, as a society, we start to just even at the personal level, where people just they decide the benefits are just like, I'm going to be recording every conversation I have with my partner, and if there's a dispute about when someone was going to get home at 6 o'clock and stuff like that, we can actually know for sure? Or do you think that that value of privacy is more like, you know, deep in the human psyche?
That's a great question. And I think a lot of personal disputes are much less about whether or not somebody actually said a word, and it's more about something else that's out there. So I'm
Yeah,
not sure how helpful that would be
that's so
to
true.
have to have all the facts on the table. But I would say there's a pattern of technology coming out, being decently expensive, being used really in revenue generating contexts where when computers were first invented, well, we started out in the internet started out as a military invention and then gradually became a academic platform and then gradually spread to businesses and then gradually spread to the broad end user base. And it's potentially possible we'd see something similar with AI technology, where today uh, AI inference is pretty expensive.
Hmm.
You need to pay quite a bit for it, a little bit more than your average Netflix subscription. But it's entirely possible as technology advances, technology gets cheaper, adoption gets wider, and uh, smart people discover really, really useful applications for this outside of business, inside of what other applications there are. I don't know if you've seen some of the recent, I think Meta announced augmented reality glasses that fit a regular sunglass form factor, which was very, very interesting.
That
But
sounds
there's
super cool. What was the pitch? Like, what were they saying was like the benefits of that?
So this is something that I think they've been working on for a really long time. Yeah, this was September 25th, 2024. They unveiled Orion, which is their augmented reality glasses. It's a really hard hardware and it's really hard software problem. That's
Hmm.
something lots of companies have been working on for a while, but it's this really interesting trend of getting computers more integrated into our day-to-day life. Um, Very much a side conversation from getting data from video conferences in these meetings, but also really interesting new technology that's coming out.
For sure, yeah. I'm thinking about the benefits to an autistic person who struggles to read a room and perceive facial expressions, and your glasses can tell you that this person is not very happy with you right now. So or whatever it is. Um, So, so in terms of other things which are only tangentially related to your company, you're in San Francisco, And so you're in. There's so much AI stuff happening. That's like they're probably the center of the world right now for a lot of this AI stuff. Do you have any hot takes on AGI? Do you think we'll see it in our lifetimes?
Do I think we're going to see AGI in our lifetimes? That's a very deep question. From what I'm seeing today, and especially from the companies that we're working with, there's so much potential around AI software and AI technology. The rate of improvement we've seen, at least in accuracy around, for example, something so simple as getting action items from a daily stand up, it's actually really nuanced when you think about it. What counts as an action item, maybe in
Hmm.
2022, you could detect an action item if you very formally said, "This is an action item,
Yeah.
follow up with a customer." But today we're at a point where we can have a really natural conversation and say something like, "Hey, Jesse, have you followed up with that customer?" And you can say, "Not yet." And I could say, "Well, we should do that probably before the week's up." And you can
Hmm.
have a large language model turn that into, "Next step, Jesse, talk to customer on Friday."
Hmm.
And as we get closer and closer to, this is the level of output a really smart and focused human can accomplish, I think the things that people are going to be able to build are just going to get better and better and better, and that's just very exciting.
Yeah, totally. So is there anything else while you've got the floor, like you want to tell people about Recall AI? Like, are you hiring? Any of that kind of stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're hiring. We're hiring across a bunch of roles, but I assume for this podcast in particular, there's going to be a fair number of software engineers.
Yeah, that's
We
about
are
right.
we're hiring software engineers across the world. We are a remote engineering team. And the biggest thing that people thinking about potentially joining or working at a startup, one of the things that's just really, really interesting about Recall from an engineering perspective is that we run a very large scale and high performance workload in a very, very unique way because we're processing a huge volume of video data, which inherently needs to be very performance sensitive because we're processing meetings specifically. Our scaling pattern is extremely spiky at 9 a.m. Pacific time. Thousands of people all jump into their daily stand up at the exact same time, and you go
Mm.
from 0 to 10,000 nodes in the span of seconds. It's a really interesting workload. It's a really interesting set of problems we have. Um, and working at Recall is just a very, very unique engineering environment because you get to solve problems at a scale where typically you'd have to be at a company 100 times larger.
That sounds super exciting. I've got some people I can even think of off the top of my head right now who'd be down for stuff like that. It's people who just like they love the performance. They're all in on Rust. You know what I mean? They want to be in a small company. So it sounds like it would be a lot of fun. So all right, was there anything else you wanted to bring up? Like, is there somewhere you want to point people to if they want to learn more about yourself, for example?
If you want to learn more about me or Recall, you should go to recall.ai, recall.ai.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you might be able to link that in the description
I
if
can
you're
do
open to
that.
it.
I can do that. It's my third podcast episode. I got to learn to start doing the links in the description. Cool. All right, David. Well, thanks for coming on the podcast. It's been a blast, and yeah, looking forward to seeing what happens with your company and seeing you take over the world of meeting bots.
Fantastic. Great catching up, Jesse.
All right, that was a lot of fun. Hope you enjoyed it. If you want to learn more about Recall.ai, just go to their website at Recall.ai. And if you're interested in like careers there, just scroll to the bottom. There's a career section, and you can start working with Rust in your day job, like every great developer wants. And yeah, If you want to learn more about my company, Subble, go to subble.com. That's subble.com. And there's a good chance we can save you a ton of money on your company's software subscription. So without further ado, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.